Before starting the video, if you like exciting stories of legendary pilots, unforgettable air battles, and remarkable events in aviation, subscribe to our channel. Our channel is new, and we need subscribers. Thank you for your attention, and let's now go to the incredible story of George Preddy. The name George Preddy became a symbol of skill, precision, and courage in the skies of World War II. Among the pilots who operated the iconic P-51 Mustang, he stood out in a singular way, not only for his impressive victories, but also for his exemplary conduct during his flights. In a conflict where the sky became a stage for quick decisions and complex strategies, Preddy shone like few others. Born in the state of North Carolina, George showed a fascination with aviation from an early age. His dream was simple: to fly. But like so many others of his generation, destiny led him to something greater than he imagined. When the war intensified, he volunteered and quickly drew attention for his discipline, dedication, and remarkable skill in aerial maneuvers. At the controls of his P-51 Mustang, he became a reference among his colleagues. The Mustang, famous for its speed, range, and agility, perfectly matched Preddy's style, who preferred precise attacks and well-calculated defensive maneuvers. He was not an impulsive pilot. On the contrary, he was methodical. He studied the enemy, anticipated movements, and always sought to protect his companions. By 1944, his name was already circulating as one of the main pilots of his unit. He was respected not only for his victories, but for his leadership in flight and care for newcomers. It was not uncommon to see him taking dangerous positions to ensure that his colleagues could return safely. This made him admired and beloved among the other aviators, but it was on a specific day that year that George Preddy forever marked the history of combat aviation. In the midst of an escort mission, he found himself in a critical situation. A large group of enemy aircraft had broken through the protective line and was moving quickly against the Allied bombers. Preddy knew time was short. Without hesitation, he turned his aircraft and entered directly into the attacking group. What followed was one of the most intense combat sequences ever recorded by a Mustang pilot. With surgical precision, he shot down 6 aircraft in a short period. Reports say that his calm during combat was impressive. Each shot was measured, each maneuver studied. It was as if everything around him slowed down while he focused on the target. This feat was impressive, not only for the victories, but also for what it represented: a solitary and determined effort to save lives. By confronting those adversaries, he prevented a significant number of Allied bombers from being hit. His action was vital to the success of the mission, and records show that he returned to the field with his aircraft damaged, but with his duty fulfilled. However, even after this historic moment, George did not allow recognition to go to his head. He remained the same reserved, dedicated leader who preferred the skies to the headlines. His colleagues saw him as an example. He was the type of pilot who listened more than he spoke, who guided with patience, and who inspired simply with his presence. His mastery of the Mustang was remarkable. Many who flew by his side reported that he seemed to have a sixth sense in the air. He knew exactly when to attack, when to retreat, and how to find the best route to protect his formation. This ability, combined with his deep sense of duty, made him one of the most effective and respected pilots of the entire war. However, fate, which he had so often successfully defied, reserved an unexpected ending for him. After the impressive dogfight in which George Preddy shot down 6 enemy aircraft in a single day, his name echoed strongly through the corridors of Allied air bases in Europe. It was December 1944. A crucial month in the war, when winter began to make aerial missions difficult and the front line on the ground was in constant movement. Ground troops increasingly needed support from the skies, and escort pilots became decisive elements in the battles unfolding on the continent. Preddy, already decorated and recognized, did not change his behavior. He was a contained, focused man who approached each mission with the same seriousness as the first. While others celebrated in base bars after flights, he preferred to review maps, study tactics, and guide the younger ones. The responsibility he carried was not limited to his flights. He was also a guardian of the lives of those who flew by his side. The fame he gained after the sequence of kills was not the result of a search for personal glory. For him, each victory represented the chance for a squadron companion to return home. Each well-executed maneuver, each neutralized target, meant protection for the bombers that flew heavy and slow, carrying the weight of a war in European skies. His protective instinct was strong, almost paternal. That same month, during one of the most decisive offensives of the end of the war, the famous Battle of the Bulge gained intensity. Ground forces were facing difficulties, and air support became even more vital. The severe weather conditions, with dense fog and snow covering the fields, made flights extremely dangerous. Even so, Preddy always volunteered. He was driven by a sense of duty that seemed to have no limits. On one of those icy days, he and his squadron received a mission to carry out a tactical support flight to cover Allied units that were being pressed by enemy forces. The plan was to fly over areas near Cologne and intervene whenever an air threat arose. The pilots knew that visibility was terrible and that the risks were high. Still, Preddy, as always, led the formation. Shortly after the start of the mission, signs of enemy presence began to appear on the radios. Planes were spotted and a brief confrontation unfolded. Preddy, with his usual precision, entered combat and once again achieved success. It was another clean and efficient victory, without fanfare or dramatization. His victory records increased, but he barely mentioned it when returning to the ground. However, when returning to the base and crossing the skies of the front line, something tragic happened. Amid the dense fog and confusion of coordinates, his aircraft was hit by friendly fire from an anti-aircraft battery on the ground. The projectile pierced his P-51 with devastating precision. Preddy still tried to maneuver the aircraft and make a forced landing, but the altitude and damage did not allow it. News of the loss spread quickly. For his companions, the pain was almost physical. It was hard to believe that that pilot, who had escaped numerous air combats with skill, had lost his life not by enemy hands, but by a tragic error in the heat of battle. It was the cruel portrait of war, unpredictable, cold, and indifferent to a man's talent or kindness. The base where he operated plunged into silence. The younger pilots, who saw Preddy as a mentor, spent days in mourning. His commanders deeply lamented the loss of a leader whose skill had saved hundreds of lives. Among the bombers he escorted, many learned of the news and sent messages of gratitude and grief. They knew they were alive because of that man in the skies. George Preddy's trajectory was not just that of a combat pilot. It was the story of someone who took commitment to the mission and to colleagues to the extreme. He was remembered not by the numbers in reports, but by the daily example of courage and integrity. With his death, the Mustang Cripes a Mighty, the name of his aircraft, came to be remembered with reverence. The blue paint, the tapered nose, the victory marks on the fuselage. Everything became a symbol of an era, of a struggle, and of a man who flew not out of vanity, but out of vocation. At the end of that year, George Preddy was honored in a simple but deeply respectful ceremony. One of his companions said, with a choked voice, "He was the best of us, not just for how many times he returned, but for how many times he made us return." The loss of George Preddy left a deep mark not only on his squadron companions, but also on all who followed the efforts of Allied pilots in the skies of Europe. For many, he was more than an ace fighter. He was an example of how skill, discipline, and humanity could coexist even in the most adverse conditions of war. After his death, tributes began to appear at different air bases. They were not grand or ceremonial tributes. They were simple but significant gestures. One of the most touching was the painting of a Mustang with the name Cripes a Mighty, again stamped on the fuselage, as a way to keep Preddy's memory alive among those who still flew. Some pilots even adopted small traditions before missions, such as touching the tip of the plane or looking at the sky in silence, as if asking for the same protection that he always offered to others. The name George Preddy was also eternalized. In the official Air Force reports, in 1944, he ended the year as the pilot with the most aerial victories in the P-51 Mustang, an impressive feat considering the level of difficulty and the risks involved in each mission. But for those who knew him, the number of victories was never what mattered most. What defined George was the way he flew, with purpose. In the midst of the chaos of World War II, he stood out for not allowing the environment to transform him. Many pilots, even the most experienced, ended up being consumed by pressure, by the repetition of missions, and by constant losses. Preddy, however, maintained focus. He was a professional who respected each flight as if it were the first. He was fully aware of the impact of his actions, and perhaps that's why he was so cautious with the lives of others. He understood that what was at stake was much greater than medals or personal glory. His squadron colleagues told stories that revealed this human side. Once, after a particularly difficult mission in which an Allied aircraft was shot down, Preddy spent hours helping in the search for debris and survivors, even without obligation. On another occasion, he voluntarily postponed a leave to train a new pilot who showed insecurity. These attitudes were invisible in official records, but unforgettable for those who lived by his side. With the end of the war approaching, many believed that George could assume higher positions or even leave combat and act as an instructor. Some said he would be an important name in the history of American aviation even after the war. His technical knowledge, leadership ability, and ethical stance made him a natural candidate for any prominent function. But fate, relentless as always, took him before these possibilities materialized. Even so, George Preddy's legacy was not limited to those years of conflict. Over the following decades, his name was remembered in books, documentaries, museums, and historical events. In his hometown, a memorial was erected in his honor. It was not a grand monument, but it was loaded with meaning. There were photos, reports, and objects that helped tell the story of a young man who, with courage and dignity, faced the skies. Of Europe, the story of the dogfight in which he shot down 6 planes in a single day was widely studied by experts in aerial tactics. Many analyze the records of that combat as an example of excellence in flight, showing how the union between technique, instinct, and quick thinking can change the course of a battle. But more than that, Preddy's feat came to be told as a story of silent bravery. The kind of courage that doesn't shout but inspires. In modern times, when war is remembered for its numbers, maps, and large operations, George Preddy's story invites us to look at another side, the human side of aviation. He was not just a pilot. He was someone who understood the weight of being in the skies, of having lives under his responsibility, and of deciding in seconds the fate of many. For content creators, historians, and educators who address this period of history, Preddy's life is an essential starting point. To talk about him is to remember that World War II was not made only by great generals and cabinet strategies. It was also shaped by men and women who, like Preddy, made difficult choices in silence, away from the spotlight, but whose importance remains alive. And if today the P-51 Mustang is still revered as one of the most emblematic aircraft in history, it is partly because of pilots like him. Those who transformed a machine into a symbol of resistance, precision, and commitment to a mission greater than themselves. In concluding this tribute, it's not just about recounting the deeds of a pilot. It's about valuing the posture of someone who flew with courage, but also with compassion. Of someone who, even facing the hardness of combat, never ceased to be an example of humanity. Years have passed since that winter of 1944, when the skies over Europe witnessed both the glory and the tragedy involving George Preddy. But while the plains of that time have become museum relics and the battlefields have been taken over again by vegetation, Preddy's memory has continued alive, not as a shadow of the past, but as a permanent lesson on what it means to be a leader, to be fair, and to fly with purpose. Beyond the statistics which record his victories and decorations, it is in the testimony of those who cross the skies by his side that his greatness is truly revealed. Many veterans, when interviewed decades after the war, still mention George's name with a sparkle in their eyes, not as the invincible man, but as someone who provided security. It was common to hear phrases like, "If Preddy was in the air, with us we knew we would return." That in itself is already more powerful than any medal. The heritage he left is not made of trophies, but of influence. Young aviators who came after studied his maneuvers, reviewed his tactics, and tried to understand what was behind so much success in combat. The answer, frequently, was not only in the technique, but in his mentality. He didn't fly to win, he flew to protect. This inversion of objective was what made him special. His piloting style was marked by serenity amid chaos. While other pilots let themselves be carried away by the adrenaline of a dogfight, Preddy kept a cool mind. He observed the battlefield like a chess player analyzing the board. He knew where he should be, where his companions were going, and where danger could arise. It was as if he had a vision beyond the horizon, a sixth sense shaped by experience, and awareness of duty. This posture influenced the way many units operated from then on. Some squadrons even came to adapt their training based on reports about his way of leading. Instead of stimulating only quick reflexes and boldness, they began to value planning, team spirit, and strategic thinking. Virtues that Preddy embodied. Almost naturally, in the following decades, his name came to be cited in military academies, history books, and documentaries focused on aviation. The story of the dogfight in which he shot down 6 planes in a single day became a symbol of what a human being can do when aligned with their principles and mission. More than speed or armament, it was the sense of responsibility that moved him that day. And it was this that saved dozens of lives. The most moving aspect, perhaps, lies in the way his death was faced. Despite having been the result of a tragic friendly fire error, it was never treated with revolt. Those who knew him knew that he would not want guilt or accusations. It was known that in times of war, even the best can be reached by mistakes of fate. And it is precisely this mature acceptance of reality that makes his legacy even more respectable. He was not just a talented pilot, he was someone who understood human limits, even his own. The Mustang he piloted, the Cripes Mighty, came to be portrayed in scale models, paintings, and collector's models around the world, not as a simple warplane, but as a symbol of a greater story. Many aviation enthusiasts keep alive the image of that blue aircraft with white stripes, which reminds us not only of technological power, but of the human skill that guided it. Today, in a time very different from that lived in the 40s, the figure of George Preddy still resonates. In a world where speed and ego are frequently confused with leadership, his story offers us a precious counterpoint. That of someone who led with humility, won with modesty, and lived with purpose. In educational videos like this one, the mission is not to glorify war, but to understand the human paths that arise in it. George Preddy is not remembered because he defeated an impressive number of enemies, but because he was a beacon of balance and humanity within a conflict scenario. His life shows us that, even in the darkest moments of history, it is possible to act with honor, protect others, and maintain integrity. And so, each time a young pilot learns about him, or when someone watches a video about his trajectory, it is more than a lesson in aviation. It is a reminder that true heroes are not those who just win, but those who do so guided by values that resist time. George Preddy flew for the last time on December 25, 1944. But his journey did not end that day. It continues each time his story is told with respect, each time someone is inspired by his example, and each time we remember that even in the skies of war, there can be space for silent courage, for fair leadership, and for commitment to the greater good.